Okay, so this is basically about two separate occasions on which Michael Flynn had contacts with the Russian ambassador before the president became the president in late December. And according to the FBI, when the FBI asked him about these conversations January 24th, 4 days after Donald Trump became president, he lied and denied having these conversations. But here's what he now has said, according to court documents, and told Mueller's investigators happened. The first is December 22nd, when, according to these court documents, a very senior member of the presidential transition, now it doesn't identify this person, just very senior member of the transition, directed Flynn to call foreign officials to talk to them about either delaying or voting against a UN resolution that Egypt had introduced about Israeli settlements. Flynn contacted the Russian ambassador to the U.S. and asked Russia to delay or vote against the resolution. And according to these documents, the next day, the Russian ambassador told Flynn that Russia would not be voting against it. Then the next thing is December 28th. That's when President Obama announces sanctions against Russia for its meddling in the election. And according to the court documents, the next day, Flynn called someone in the presidential transition operation down in Mar-a-Lago, Florida, at the Trump resort, someone identified in the court documents as a senior official of the transition team, so we have to assume it's someone different than the one that he had talked to the week before, saying, what are we going to do? What should we tell the Russians about these sanctions? And according to the court documents, Flynn and this official agreed that he should reach out to try to persuade the Russians not to escalate the situation because they thought that would be bad for the Trump foreign policy of trying to have friendlier relations with Russia. So, according to the documents, Flynn has said that he called the ambassador and asked Russia not to ramp things up, and that Russia agreed to do this. And Flynn then talked to senior members of the transition team and said that the Russians had agreed not to escalate the situation. And indeed, a short time later, President Putin announced that Russia would have only what they called a proportionate response. Now, there's one other thing that's interesting, I think, Andrea, about these court documents. They also say that, separate and apart from these conversations with the Russians, that in March of this year, Michael Flynn filled out a report on his lobbying activities and falsely claimed that he wasn't involved with Turkey on an operation that his company was, the Flynn Associates was doing that involved Turkey. So what does that mean? It means that the Mueller prosecutors could have charged him with that and chose not to, a further sign of a deal. And I would say one other thing, Andrea. The fact of all these details in this document can only mean one thing, that they came from Michael Flynn. So it's a sign of his cooperation. And, of course, the fact that it's a serious charge, lying to the FBI, carries a potential 5-year prison sentence. The fact that he won't be sentenced until next year, there's a status conference scheduled for February, but he could be sentenced then or later, or the sentencing date will be set at that time. That means that the prosecutors have this over his head, that if he doesn't continue to cooperate, they could seek a harsh sentence, or they could also file additional charges against him, Andrea.
And following up on Pete, check